Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Live Free Now show, bringing you the news, views, tips, and tools you can use to live a free, prosperous, and healthy life. And today we are going to be talking about self-governance. Essentially, the idea that we need not rely on the state in order to organize society, and rather we should accept the inherent freedom that we all have as sovereign human beings and allow one another to rule over our own lives. And I know it's strange that it's just a crazy world we're living in, that this is some obscure, controversial topic, the idea that we should rule ourselves. So many people have swallowed the pill that we absolutely need government as an institution in order to have a civilized society, when in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. And we're specifically going to cover the topic of self-governance in the context of the debate that took place, the presidential debate that took place last night between President Donald J. Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. And if you watched it, it was a total train wreck and a total shit show. And it should only serve to underscore the idea that we don't need rulers, especially when the choices are these two total clowns that are completely out of touch from the general public in America. Yet, in spite of such a terrible performance by both of them, Trump bullying, speaking out of turn so much, we knew that that was his style and that's what he was going for. But man, it was pretty excessive. And then Biden just being befuddled and kind of clueless at times where he's like staring off into space, just coming out as weak, them both acting really disgraceful. As an anarchist and voluntarist, sometimes we appreciate this type of stuff because it only further delegitimizes the institution of the presidency, which is unnecessary. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the debate, but I want to challenge you, the viewer, if you are skeptical of the possibility of society being organized through alternative ways, not the status quo, the statist quo that is basically all everyone knows. If you're skeptical, this is for you. And if you're already on board and are a voluntarist, or you believe we should organize society through mutually beneficial voluntary association rather than coercive top-down hierarchy, then I'm going to challenge you to redouble your efforts to speak to friends, family, associates, coworkers, post online, more importantly in person though, and help people to understand that there are other ways to go about doing things, and that we as human beings living in the 21st century, there exists the technology, the innovation, the radical ideas to where we shouldn't be organizing ourselves with this terrible monopoly concept. We can do better. We deserve better as human beings. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That was the intro. I want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast at livefreenow.show. This is the Live Free Now show. We broadcast live on the Conscious Resistance Network and some other channels as well. We're also broadcasting on the Agorism Facebook page if there's anybody watching there, as well as Freedom Cells. We're going to talk about Freedom Cells later. And then the audio from this is taken and uploaded as part of the podcast. If you prefer to subscribe on the RSS feed and listen to podcasts in your drive or whatever, you can go to livefreenow.show, livefreenow.show. Also, the program is sponsored by freeounceofkratom.com. You can try a free ounce of kratom. Just pay $5 shipping and handling. Helps with stress, anxiety, taking the edge off. There's also red varieties that are really good for chronic pain, white varieties that are good for focus and motivation. And this is the one that's free bros.freeouncekratom.com, but you're presented with an opportunity to try the other 4 types for 50% off. Also, if you're watching on the Conscious Resistance, be sure you go to bros.freeouncekratom.com, bros.freeouncekratom.com, so the Conscious Resistance Network can get a little financial support from your purchase. We're also going to be going to your comments. That's one of the reasons why we do it live, so we can interact with you guys and see where you're going. So, yeah, here's someone that says, I was voting this year for the first time until it literally turned into a shit show. Our government is a fucking circus. I can't go with vote for the lesser evil. And Oilfield Trash says, been using Kratom since 2004, and I must say it is physically addictive. Well, that's a topic that we cover ad nauseum, at length, on other videos. You can become physically dependent on Kratom. It's really important to use it responsibly, to take time off, to give your body an opportunity for the organs to reset, and so you don't develop a tolerance. But if it's used responsibly, no problems whatsoever. But if someone takes a whole lot of it and takes a lot of it regularly, then you could potentially become physically dependent. So it's something to be conscious of. Okay, so we find ourselves in this false left-right paradigm where every 4 years, the United States voting public is presented with 2 options, the Democrat or the Republican. There's often kind of a gadfly libertarian candidate that's crying and whining and complaining about not being included in the debates. My take on the Libertarian Party, I'm not a big fan of the Libertarian Party. I'm not very fond of the Libertarian Party. I don't believe that the Libertarian Party does a whole lot in order to actually reduce the size and scope of government and create more freedom in people's lives. I believe there's a lot of bureaucracy and self-preservation, so to speak, where like the purpose of the party is to preserve ballot access and preserve the institutions or the secretaries or whatever. But, you know, in all honesty, the voting public doesn't want libertarianism, and they demonstrate that far too often by voting for big government stooges, both in the Democrat and Republican Party. The people that vote in the elections, they want to be ruled. They want the status quo to maintain itself. So if you are a libertarian or a radical thinker, or you have a philosophy that vehemently objects to the status quo, one of the things we're going to talk about today are some other ways to go about reaching your goals. And so besides the Libertarian Party candidate, you're met with Democrat or Republican. And just the whole essence of the way that this system works, whereby this has never been more clear than today, where the American public seems to be so divided and at odds with one another. And I would like to share that I think it's a really terrible idea. It's a terrible system when one group of people, approximately 50% of the voting public, I think it's like 50% or so actually vote out of the general public. So that's like 25% of the US population. When 50% of the people can choose someone and they get elected, and then all of a sudden the entire population is subjected to the policies of that group. Oftentimes, it's not even the people that are voting for the candidate. The candidate doesn't necessarily reflect their views or their policies. And then oftentimes people are so damn brainwashed and going along to getting along and following the leader that their policies and their beliefs all of a sudden are what Trump believes or what Biden believes, right? They're just carried along like lemmings, or like they're following along with the flute being played. And it's not good. We don't have to have a world where everyone is forced to comply with policies that they don't agree with. And the way that things are done now is through hardcore centralization. And all throughout the 20th century, we have seen the centralization through the hands of the nation state, which is the prevailing institution for organizing society. Lots of power within the nation state. I, for one, am not a fan of the nation state. I think it's an unnatural behemoth that causes more harm than good. I'm not a fan of globalism or global government either. I want to decentralize authority and power all the way to the individual, or at least some local, more autonomous form of governance or self-organization. I try to avoid the term governance when at all possible, because the root of that word, to govern, really means to rule over. However, like the example in Charan, Mexico, which is in Michoacan, one of the most violent states with all sorts of cartel activity in Mexico, they actually returned to an indigenous form of more like a participatory democracy, indigenous form of governance that really works for them. They choose their leaders in a decentralized way. The leaders are part of the community. They ran out political parties from the state and federal level. There's no political parties. There's no campaigning like that in the traditional sense. They threw out the mayor and the existing governmental structure and the police department and instituted their own community defense made up of people within the community. So that works for them. A lot of it has to do with self-determination and autonomy. And again, what we have in the United States, I think there's like 329 million people, over 300 million people in this massive geographic area are expected to all comply with the rules, the edicts, the guidelines, the laws, the policies, the regulations of who's ever in power. On top of that, there is a small channel of acceptable policy and thought, even if it's someone on the left or the right. It doesn't dramatically shift what's going on. Now, I will say that Trump represents a departure from the Bush-Clinton crime families that have controlled American politics for the past 20 years, right? It was Reagan with George H.W. Bush, super duper insider, former CIA director, and then his father, Prescott Bush, like deep level secret society stuff. It was Vice President Bush under Reagan, right? Then it was President Bush. Then it was Clinton, Bill Clinton, crime family. Then it went back over to Bush, the son, George W. Bush, with 9/11 and the Patriot Act and all that stuff. Then it went to Obama with Clinton as the Secretary of State. Now it's to Trump, which is, again, a departure from all that. Now, however, there's a whole lot of authoritarianism and control. And we see now that, I don't know. So I did a podcast last week about expecting some serious increase in civil unrest. And it's clear that Trump is positioning himself where if Biden wins, he's going to call the election a fraud. He's already setting the stage, right? If you have any level of critical thinking or discernment, or you know how this type of stuff works, he's setting the stage. He's priming the American public, especially his followers, his base, to be prepared to resist the election results should it not go to him. And last night, one of the big things from the debate was when he was asked by Chris Wallace to denounce white supremacists and white supremacy and encourage white supremacists and militia folks to step down or to calm down and wait for a peaceful transition. And he essentially he could have just been like, oh yeah, of course I am against white supremacy and think militia groups need to calm down. Instead, he was like, he pivoted back to the left, but then when they specifically talked about Proud Boys, he said to stand by, stand down and stand by, which is, I think he doesn't want to, I don't think he could actually alienate his base because people are so infatuated with the guy. They'll follow him. He even once said, like, I could kill somebody on Fifth Avenue or Times Square and my followers would still support me. I think he's literally getting his followers ready to be ready to hold office, which is going to be some pretty trying times for this country. So I got off on this tangent by just pointing out that at least Trump, not a Trump supporter, not a Trump fan, but at least he represents a departure from this little channel in that he's pulling out of globalist trade policies. He's speaking out against the mainstream media, the fourth branch of government, so on and so forth. However, he's still an authoritarian, and there's some fascist tendencies, right? So now we see fascism versus communism kind of coming into play, and it's not good. It's also a false dichotomy. So I think people are far too often trapped, and they're incapable of thinking outside of the box, incapable of thinking outside of the ballot box. Even though everyone knows that Trump is an ass, most people, right? There's still going to be people that support him here, and they're like all into the QAnon and all sorts of great stuff. Oh, look at this sweet message. Hey, John, hope you're having an amazing day. Thank you. I am having an amazing day, by the way. There are people going to support Trump, but a lot of people really don't like Trump. A lot of people really love Trump. A lot of people really don't like Trump. There's not a lot of people that really love Biden. And so there's a performance like last night where they were both really nasty, ugly, didn't present a clear case or position or plan, which is what all the commentators said. People are wanting to see a plan for America. And then in the aftermath of the debate, the whole conversation is trolling and upset and pissed off. And how could these people do this? And we're annoyed. That's what the polls said. They were annoyed. That was the prevailing feeling. Yet people are still stuck in this little box, this little idea that, well, we got to pick one of them, or we got to vote third party as a protest vote, or this should really just underscore why we need to vote for Joe Biden because Trump was so nasty, or this really, I'm sure I'm going to back up my guy because he really beat up Biden and Biden's so weak, he'll be controlled by the left and get beat on by Russia and China. I'm here to let you know that there's another path, right? It doesn't have to be Trump or Biden. It can also be self-governance. Now, for the past 10 years or so, I have really focused on the question of how do we get from here to there? There are so many libertarian thinkers and philosophers, and a lot of people are familiar with the validity of the philosophy of liberty, specifically stemming from the idea that I own myself. I own my body and have control over my body and my faculties, right? This is the essence of libertarianism. And as such, I have a right to not be infringed upon my rights. I have a right to not be aggressed upon. This is where we get the non-aggression principle, the idea that it is unethical or immoral to initiate violence or aggression upon someone else. Now, there's an exception if it's in self-defense. And from there, we have the concept of voluntary exchange and private property rights, that we own the fruit of our labor, so on and so forth. And there's all these thinkers and authors and speakers, so on and so forth, so on and so forth, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. But what really was my focus is how do we create the free society that we all deserve, that we know, many of us know is a great idea, a novel concept, something that we ought to have, but it's like, well, you're not allowed to be totally free in this country, so maybe we should accept incremental steps. And today I want to make the case that the best thing we can do if we want to improve our condition and our standard of living and our level of freedom is to go ahead and start living free now, and to go ahead and start supporting those institutions that rival the state, that could replace the state, and to go ahead and start building the social organization that not only will enable us as social animals to continue to cooperatively meet our wants and needs, but importantly, when we reach such a size that we can adequately and effectively utilize the strength in numbers that comes with a movement, we can form and create a protective defensive shield from the aggressive state when inevitably we opt out en masse, totally, from the state. Now, the institution that I'm all in on is Freedom Cells, the Freedom Cell Network. We have over 4,000 people that are participating in the Freedom Cell Network. There is a structure, a foundation. Today, I'm going to start talking about solutions. We're going to talk about freedom cells. We're going to talk about little sovereign states that have been created, like the Free Republic of Liberland. We're going to talk about free private cities, a great novel concept. Talk about seasteading, startup societies, special economic zones. There's these great organizations, the Institute for Competitive Governance, startup societies. This is all stuff that's happening right now. There's a lot of really bright, really radical, really innovative professionals that have some really promising ideas about how we could better organize society, not the traditional monopolistic state way of doing things. And what I want to convey to you today in this live video, in this podcast, is that the opportunities are there to do something different. And we deserve that. And it takes more people to believe in these ideas, to promote these ideas, to participate, to support them financially, to support them with your sweat equity, to participate in these ideas, to bring them to fruition. But I want to pop that stupid bubble where so many people are just caught up in a trance and they think that, well, because we've been doing things this way for the past 250 years plus, that's the way things are always going to be, right? That's an is-ought fallacy. Just because that's the way things are, government, democracy, voting, rulers, doesn't mean that's the way things ought to be. And so I'm an idealist. I'm an optimist. I'm future forward thinking. I'm thinking about what type of environment do I want my kids to become adults in? What type of environment do I want my grandchildren to grow up in? And the time is now. The time is ripe for change because the system is the shittiest that it's ever been. And people are disillusioned, fed up, pissed off. And we're about to see some left versus right violence escalate like we haven't seen in since the 60s and 70s in this country. So when people are downtrodden, upset, frustrated, just totally disillusioned and disempowered, that presents an opportunity for we change makers, we innovators, and we radicals to come in and say, hey, hold on a second, it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in the area of alternative ways of organizing society. I'd love to share some of it with you if you can come to the table with an open mind. What if I told you we don't have to live like this? What if I told you we could create an environment where you're not forced to participate in that which you find to be unethical or frankly useless? That should be the reality. And it's the reality that we're building now. So here's my jam. Like I was saying, the Freedom Cell Network. You can go to freedomcells.org if you want to participate. And essentially what we're doing is creating the social organization now. We're not waiting for permission from government. We're not waiting for the general public to catch up. We are going ahead and creating a social peer-to-peer mutual aid network, mutual defense, working on common goals, a network so we can fulfill our common wants and needs cooperatively without relying on the state. We're building it now. The time is now, not then, not later, not wait for a bill to allow us to do such a thing. The time is now. Nothing that we're doing is illegal in the first place, but it is pretty radical. So the beauty about this is there's over 4,000 people participating. And this is the member map. Whenever you sign up on the site, you're encouraged to put an address. Doesn't have to be, wow, this has really grown since even the last time I checked in. Doesn't have to be your exact address for security reasons, but you can do park up the street or the local coffee shop. And these are all the people that are participating. I'm in the great state of Texas, where there's a bunch of people in Austin. There's a bunch of people in Houston, where Derek Brose is from, and there's a whole lot of people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. These are all people that are fed up with the way things are going and that are ready and willing to try something new. The Freedom Cell Network works like this. You get together with around 8 of your closest friends, confidants, associates, people that you trust, people that you want to build with. If you don't know people, then you go meet people. Use the Freedom Cell member map, use the Freedom Cell site, use the Freedom Cell Telegram chat, use the Freedom Cell Facebook page, Facebook group, whatever. You work together with 8 people. Choose the number 8 because research has shown 8 is the optimal number of people for maximum creativity and effectiveness. 8 people. You then link up with 8 groups of 8 people and you form a little middle cadre. 8 people is the inner cadre. The 8 groups of 8, around 64 people, doesn't exactly have to be 8, is what we call the middle cadre. So that 8 individual people are like in a local area. The middle cadre of around 64 people are in a city, for example. Then you link up with the other middle cadres, like in Dallas-Fort Worth, there's some, in Austin, there's some, and in Houston, there's some. We all link up and form what we call a meta cadre. We work together on common goals. There's a decision-making process. We do skill shares. We help each other plant gardens. We go to the gun range together. We do bulk food purchases together. We support one another. If someone falls on hard times, it's a mutual aid society, and it's growing exponentially. So please join us. It's not just an idea. We're not just talking about bullshit here. It's not just a philosophy club. It's not just writing books and writing essays and sharing videos and memes on Facebook. It's real life people coming together wanting to build something else because the old way of doing things isn't serving us. All right. Before I get on to these other alternatives, because again, I want to paint the picture that the way that things have been working sucks and has everyone all divided and worked up in a tizzy. And everyone is so damn indoctrinated from public school primarily that they're not even capable of thinking of another way of doing things. And when you bring it up to them, they're like, oh, that does not compute. I'm not capable of the critical thinking necessary in order to conceptualize an alternative way of organizing society because I'm so used to the way things have gone. And when I was in public school, I put my hand on my heart and did the Pledge of Allegiance every day. And I was surrounded by pictures of presidents and made to worship them. That's my impression of your average American voter. So I want to say that that sucks, and it's time to try alternatives. And there's some pretty viable alternatives that are already underway. Freedomcells.org is just one of them. Let's go to some of your questions real quick before we get back into it. And then we will share about free private cities, special economic zones, seasteading. I want to introduce you to the startup societies and the Institute for Competitive Governance. Richard Lee says, when people register, that is their vote going in. Register to vote is the message, actually. After that, you throw your vote away into the sea by casting your vote. I don't even want to register. I'm not even registered to vote. I think you stay registered to vote, like when you renew your status registration and stuff. But I feel like the more people that vote, the more authority people give to the institution, to the system. I know there's protest votes and voting against taxes or voting to decriminalize cannabis. Of course, there's benefits in all that, but I want to stay as far away from this institution of government as I possibly can, because it is not helping anything whatsoever. Mr. E says, bullseye, everything has the potential to be addictive. What about our current corrupt system in which most people are addicted to the drug of TV? He is right. Nothing outside of us has power unless we give it that. Most people don't want to know or take self-responsibility. That's a great point that you bring up, Sophia. And it's like I said before, for the Libertarian Party people, they're like super excited about putting up 3% of the vote. The general public and the voting public doesn't want self-governance. They prefer the peaceful tranquility of slavery. They prefer to be ruled over. They want to be involved and control other people's lives. Just look at all this crazy COVID stuff going on with everyone freaking out about someone not wearing a mask or talking about not taking the vaccine. And everyone just like wants to control everyone else to make them exactly as they are. People aren't ready for total freedom. But as I'll demonstrate, and as I am demonstrating today, we don't need the general public to come along in order to make significant change for our lives. Not only that, but the general public, the masses, has always gone along to get along. They don't shift the course of history. They just go with whatever path is the path of least resistance, and whatever is easiest, whatever enables them to feed their family, to come home and relax in front of the TV after a long day of work, you know? And that's okay. By all means, they have a right to that type of life. A lot of people aren't motivated for greatness or wanting to change the world. I'm listening to None Dare Call It Conspiracy on audiobook because the book's really hard to get. Classic work from the 70s about the conspiracy to create a global communist totalitarian government. And one of the things he pointed out is like most people, they just want to have a comfortable life. They don't have a desire to rule the world, right? Like an Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin type, or maybe even a Donald Trump. And so they aren't going to change the stuff that we learn about in the history books, right? However, if we as voluntarists, innovators, radicals can present a better ride, then perhaps they'll abandon the existing status quo and come and ride with us. And it doesn't take much to bring about change. For example, it's estimated that only 2% of the American population at the time of the American Revolution actually participated, right? So if we can create a better ride, like a free private city, a wonderful place where people's needs are met through the competition, and if they don't like it, then they can go to another free private city. So the management that's running the city is forced to meet their needs, right? Unlike what we have now, which is just a monopoly, no mechanism of correction. Or if we can grow the Freedom Cell Network to 50,000 or 100,000 people, and we're all just vibing and supporting one another and cheerful and happy and healthy and hosting these great events and concerts, and everyone's just living their best lives, then people will be like, whoa, what's going on with that? I just got this huge tax bill and I'm struggling to pay for this, that, and the other, but these people seem to be really happy and successful and healthy. So the idea is we do our thing, we promote all these alternatives, and slowly but surely some of the masses will come along, at least those that are on the fringes of the masses. But I have no, it's possible that the state will always exist, and we just need to figure out how we can insulate ourselves from its aggression and harm and all that stuff. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, this is the Live Free Now show, bringing you the news, views, tips, and tools you can use to live a free, prosperous, and healthy life. You can find us doing live broadcasts here on the Conscious Resistance Network or on my Facebook page or all sorts of other channels. And you can subscribe to the podcast at livefreenow.show. Oh, hey, Boo Jangles. Thanks for tuning in. My FIL, I don't know what that means. My FIL. I don't know. Gave me a copy of None Dare Call It Conspiracy before we had our first child. Oh, my father-in-law. He brought it at Brave New Books on Guadalupe. All right. I used to run Brave New Books for a couple of years. That was a great place. That's where I first learned about the book as well. It's a good one. Renegades are people with their own philosophy. They change the course of history. Everyday people like you and me. That's Rage Against the Machine. Thank you for adding that. Yes, indeed. And finally, Mystery says, I recommend the works of Etienne de la Boette and Henry David Thoreau, and of course, the works of the Founding Fathers. Yeah, Henry David Thoreau is on point, and he was definitely what he said, that government is best, which governs least, or not at all, which often gets left out. It's like that government is best, which governs least, period. But there was another line there, or not at all. And of course, Etienne de la Boette famously had this great quote about toppling the people. Let's pull that up real quick. Etienne quote, topple. Great quote. Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant to topple him over, but simply that you support him no longer. Then you will behold him like a great colossus whose pedestal has been pulled away, fall of his own weight, and break in pieces. And that's exactly what it's all about. Exactly what it's all about. If we all just withdraw our consent, then the state has no authority over us. There's enough of us already that believe in these thoughts. Frank Fred Fultz says, self-governance, let me know so I can do what I need to do. Well, the first thing that I would encourage you to do is to go over to freedomcells.org, old Frank, and join us there. It's a wonderful website where you can learn about the Freedom Cell movement. It's essentially like a social network where you can meet other people in your area that are of like mind. This is like your little Facebook page kind of deal, but it's not about sharing videos and articles, although a lot of people do that. Really, the benefit is to go find people, find the Freedom Cells, and to participate and to join our mutual aid society that we've built. So I strongly encourage you to do that. Sophia says, I'm reading the book Flourish, Alternatives to Government and Other Hierarchies by Robert Podolsky. Bob Podolsky does great work, and Bob Podolsky has the concept of the octalog, which is very similar to the concept of freedom cells. All right, so we've talked a lot about freedom cells, and I hope I've laid a good argument on why we ought to move away from the status quo, because it's creating so much division, tyranny, war, aggression, violence, thievery, not good, greatly getting in the way of human flourishing. And so I want to share some alternatives. Maybe some people aren't fully aware of all this stuff. So check it out. There's these great organizations. One of them is called the Institute for Competitive Governance. And it's essentially like a nonprofit. The Institute for Competitive Governance wants to show the world a better way to better government. Wants to show the world a better way to better government. How? By encouraging the research and development of relatively small but deeply innovative special jurisdictions. This sort of structural reform can put the power of private competition to work at finding new solutions to the oldest problems of life. Then they lay out some examples. Types of special jurisdictions include special economic zones, like Hong Kong, for example, which originally was a British territory, but then they ceded authority to China, back to China, or maybe to China for the first time. And in doing so, they had this whole idea where it's like two countries, one rule, something like that, where they would allow them to maintain their more free enterprise economy. And so special economic zone is essentially You work with an existing government to carve out a geographic jurisdiction that has different rules that the participants and citizens and people that live there, the residents, businesses, play by. Oftentimes, this comes in the form of greater economic freedom. This benefits the host nation in that they can still take a little piece of the action, a tax. They're not going to just do it without getting benefited in some sort of way. But then the people that live there are able to have more freedom, more opportunity. Shenzhen is another example. Back to this. Charter cities, mixed-use urban developments administered by third-party governments within a host country. Examples include early American colonies like Pennsylvania and proposed contemporary ones. Private cities, privately owned and operated mixed-use urban developments. Example include city-size HOAs like Highland Park, Colorado, and the Gurgaon in northern India. Cooperatives, communities in which residents manage their jointly owned property. Examples include Co-op City in the Bronx area of New York City and Marielanda, Spain. Microstates, small states often no larger than cities. Examples include Liechtenstein, a microstate with one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. Now, one of these I want to center in on is the idea of a free private city. So there's a guy named Titus Gebel that does work. He wrote a book about this. And essentially, a lot of people are going to be opposed to this, but I believe that it's better than what we have as the status quo, but it still has opportunity for problems. So it's a free private city, and essentially it's a city that's governed by a company, a business, or a corporation. And it's this entity that carries out the duties that normally a city government would do. Protection through some sort of security force, maintaining the land or the common space, and ensuring the satisfaction of the customers or clients, which would be the residents in the city. Now, the reason why this has benefit is because unlike governments, which operate on a monopoly, and whether you are happy with the service the government's providing, it's not really a service, it's control, but whether you're happy or not, you still are forced to participate. And so the idea is with a free private city, you know, some of these could work like a cooperative where you have partial ownership in the entity that controls and runs and operates the city as a service, right? But you can vote with your dollars and vote with your feet, and it's like, all right, you're no longer serving us, then you're out. Or you're a shareholder in the corporation that operates the city, and you have there's more of a mechanism of correction that doesn't exist with the status quo. Ideally, there's a wide variety of free private cities, 5 or 6 of them, competing for your service, for you as a customer. And so if you don't like it, you can be like, well, the guys down the road, or there's less of a fee to live there, there's more safety, and there's not this problem of corruption or whatever, so you pack out. In that regard, competition helps to lift up everyone and encourage them to create better service. This is like an anarcho-capitalist dream here. But there's a great website, great book, Welcome to Free Private Cities, My Proposal for Further Development of Human Coexistence. This guy's an anarcho-capitalist. Conventional systems are obviously reaching their limits in the 21st century, but there is a peaceful and above all voluntary alternative, free private cities. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that's taking place, what is this? In a free private city, everyone is sovereign of himself or herself, who by voluntary agreement has concluded a genuine contract with a more or less ordinary service provider, the citizen's contract. Both parties have the same formal rights and therefore legally on an equal footing. So there you have a contract that essentially, it's like a social contract that you opt into rather than just being born in a geographic area. You're forced to comply or follow all the rules. This is something that you can opt into, which has its benefits. So here's Charlie saying, I need some anarchist friends. I have 0. Join the Freedom Cells website, freedomcells.org, and you might just find some people that are in your area that you can meet up with and become pals and friends. All right, another thing that's taking place here, this was pretty radical, the Free Republic of Liberland. This guy's a voluntarist, libertarian kind of guy as well. This was a disputed territory between Croatia and Serbia. It wasn't even really disputed. After some wars, I think in the 90s, nobody lived there, and it was just kind of ignored. So this guy Vit Jedlicka and some others were like, let's go claim this as a sovereign territory. So what they're doing is pretty radical in that they are declaring that they control this section of land, and now they're sovereign and they have a sovereign country. Now, I think this country actually might be recognized by another small country, but they got a long ways to go, and they've been bossed around and bothered by the police force from one of these countries. But there's some land in this world, in this globe on Earth, that isn't claimed per se, probably barely any, but these guys found a little piece of it and just declared that there's a country. I think they have some structures on the land. You can get citizenship. You can apply to become a citizen of the Free Republic of Liberland. Imagine having a business where it's chartered there in Liberland. They have a constitution. So this is some pretty cool stuff going on here. Another example of innovative governance and cool things that we can do is the Seasteading Institute. Now, I'm familiar, pretty close with the Seasteading Institute. I produced the podcast that they did. Here, look at that, blog and podcast. And this is a great idea. And essentially, it's like instead of homesteading, you're seasteading, and you're creating structures out on the ocean, which is supposed to be outside of the jurisdiction of normal government. And so there's a lot of great opportunity for this, not only for this idea of competitive governance. A lot of this boils down to, let's just try and experiment with other ways to organize society, not just government, elections, democracy, communism, socialism, democratic socialism, or whatever, with rulers, right? Let's let 1,000 different cities, 1,000 different forms of governance bloom, and let's see what is the best, because there's a lot of opportunity out there that we as human beings haven't even tapped into. And so the idea is, when you have these free private cities over here, you have Liberland over there, you have the seasteads over here, it's like, wow, maybe that's a good way to do things. Maybe they're onto something with this anarcho-capitalist government as a business idea. Oh no, maybe we're onto something over here with this freedom cells, this decentralized peer-to-peer network. It's non-territorial, but these people are supporting one another and providing and helping one another. And so the seasteads are super cool. One of the great opportunities for a seastead, which is the real deal, is in the area of healthcare. Unfortunately, big governments want to control your choice of healthcare and the choice of treatment and all sorts of stuff. So one of the opportunities, one of the use cases for seasteads is you have a great big ship, like a ship liner or a cruise ship, but instead it's a hospital. And so it parks outside of the jurisdiction, and people can fly by helicopter or take a boat out to it, and they can have experimental surgeries or experimental modalities that may not be approved by the FDA, therefore they're not allowed on land. So that's one thing. There's actually some active projects. Now, I will say, even though you think that, oh, you're out in the ocean, outside the jurisdiction or territory of an existing government, we should be okay. There was a couple named Chad and Nadia. I think they were like wealthy from crypto, and they created perhaps the world's first seastead off the coast of Thailand. And it was like kind of a box, not very exciting looking, but it was supposed to be like a little apartment. And the country of Thailand caught wind of it and went out there and towed the thing away. Thankfully, they were tipped off and got out of town. But it turns out that they have been charged by the Thailand government with some sort of treason. They broke some law, and that says that they were violating and questioning the sovereignty of Thailand, and the law they broke is punishable by death. So I guess they're like in hiding, or they're like hardcore international rebels, which is super cool on them. But a lot of this stuff is risky, even if you're outside in the ocean. But let's look at some of these active projects Seastead Institute has going on. This is a company called Ocean Builders. They're based in Panama, and they want to create these really exquisite, beautiful pods that people can live in, that businesses can operate out of. They look really cool. Here's one in a land-based pod, but they want to do it out to sea. Now imagine a whole network of all of these that are out to sea and they're connected, and there's maybe like a common space. Really cool concept. And again, this is innovations in government. The Ventive Float House, based in California. The mission is to build permanent ocean communities for the masses, usually modular structures designed to make ocean living safe, comfortable, and affordable. Blue Frontiers. This is a company that my girlfriend's familiar with the guy that runs this one. And look at just look at the picture, how cool this kind of stuff is. They want to create these little floating cities. There's all sorts of cool innovations going on in fishing and sustainable agriculture in the ocean and stuff, and getting energy out there. So blockchain-based societal tools, special legal frameworks, ecological floating habitats. This is great stuff that we're exploring here. And the only thing that's getting in the way of these radical innovations is government. Look at this. It's like a freaking condo. So beautiful. Now, some governments are open to this kind of stuff. Imagine having a government where there's not really a whole lot of stuff going on, and they're like, we don't have any economy, we got nothing going on, we're open to this experimentation. But it takes people, it takes innovators and radicals going out there and making stuff happen for it to actually work. So as you can see, we've gone over special economic zones, Freedom Cell Network, seasteading, free private cities. There's a really great institution. It's a nonprofit. It's called the Startup Societies Foundation. And for those of you that are interested in these ideas, I invite you to check it out. Don't argue, build, right? It's not about who's going to elect who. Let's fight about this, left, right, nonsense. It's like, okay, government sucks. We know there's a better way to do things. Let's go build the better way and show the world that there's a better way to do things. I'm going to bring you guys a quote about this whole concept, and I think that you'll like it. It's from Buckminster Fuller, futurist, amazing guy that did a lot of design work and stuff. And he has this great quote that says, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's what it's all about, folks. And that's what I'm trying to present to you today in this video. And the Startup Society, I think, is a great, Startup Societies Foundation is a great institution, organization that's really done a lot of work. Here are some examples of startup societies. Oh, another one I didn't touch on is eco-villages, regen villages, Liechtenstein microstate, Shenzhen special economic zone, Celebration intentional community, French Polynesia seastead. This is a project that's actively under works. Dubai, which is a smart city. You got to watch out now because there's some Illuminati stuff and some of this potential stuff here. So like the smart cities and all the 5G stuff is not ideal. But this institution puts out a journal, which is really good stuff. I strongly encourage you guys to read it. You go to Press and Publications, and they have a great journal that they publish. Where is that? I can't find it at the moment. One of the ideas that they turned me on to is this concept of non-territorial governance. So the governance isn't dependent on the physical geographic that you live in, the area that you live in. Rather, you can pick and choose what type of rules, essentially, you want to be governed by. So, for example, if I live in Austin, Texas, and I want to form a business relationship with someone, there could be an entity, maybe it's blockchain based, or it's this innovative business that provides arbitration and contract services. And so rather than being subjected to the laws of Texas when it comes to contract law and business law, me and my business partners voluntarily choose to utilize this particular contractual structure. Now, you can already do this in contracts. You say before, and if there's any disputes, then we go to this dispute resolution mechanism. But at the end of the day, it always falls back on the state of Texas as the final arbiter of justice, or whatever court has authority or jurisdiction, right? But imagine a world where we don't want to participate with that kind of thing, or even the provision of energy. It's like we don't want to tap into the municipal energy. It's too expensive. The grid goes down in California, for example. So we've chosen to work with this company that outfits this Tesla thing on your home or whatever. And there's a small fee. They maintain it. They install it. All sorts of stuff. Or marriage, for example. We want to get married because we want to have common property, for example, but we don't want to subject ourselves to the family law in the state of Texas. So we want to choose to have our rulemaking come from this institution, this innovative institution that has all these different policies, and they were trained in this different school of thought, so on and so forth. It's called non-territorial governance. So again, there's a lot of opportunity. We have the technology, we have the innovation, we certainly have the opportunity, because government is just sucking all over the place and absolutely terrible, terrible, terrible. So there's no better time than now to encourage our fellow human beings to explore these alternatives. For people that are just tuning in or just listening, I really want to encourage you to join the Freedom Cell Network. You can go to freedomcells.org. This is my version of what type of alternative society we can create. This was an idea, a concept I came up with in 2014, shared it on some podcasts and some speeches, and then kind of went back into my role as a father and focused on business and entrepreneurship. Derek Bros, who has a huge audience, really swell guy, he took the idea and ran with it and spread it across the globe, to the point where now, as we reviewed before, we have over 4,000 participants. We have a wonderful tool here called the member map. If you want to get involved, all you got to do is put in an address near your home and find that perhaps you have some people that live in your area that are of like mind and are looking to create and change things, change the world, really. These are all the participants. There's a ton of people. Lots of people in Australia. That's pretty bold considering how much of a police state Australia has come out to be. Southeast Asia, Western Europe, South Africa, South America, and a ton of people in the United States. We even have some people jamming over here in Hawaii. So the idea is that we create a mutual aid society where we support one another in a decentralized peer-to-peer way. And as the network grows in numbers, it stays decentralized, it essentially replicates itself, and it stays horizontal. You have vertical organizing, which is government, the pyramid with the controllers at the top, the president and the bureaucracy and police and the enforcers and the county and the city, and then you. That's horizontal, where the highest authorities at the top. Or you can have that's vertical, or you can have horizontal, where everyone has equal rights and you organize a network. And the beauty about this freedom cell structure, which we discussed before, it all centers around an inner cadre of around 8 people, work together on common goals, food storage, getting guns, bug out plan, skill share, helping each other garden. You have 8 people, that's the inner cadre. Then you link up with 7 other inner cadres and you create what's called a middle cadre, approximately 64 people. This is spread out across a city, for example. Maybe you get together monthly for a meetup, for socializing. You help one another. If someone lost their job and they're a few $100 short on rent, you guys could crowdsource the money. Then you link up with other middle cadres throughout the region and you form what's called a meta cadre. And the idea is, once more and more people join, the meta cadre, the middle cadre, just grows and replicates itself. And so it grows horizontally. It never creates a hierarchy, never creates this group over here has more power than this group. It just spreads out. And so the inner cadre, then instead of having a middle cadre for Austin, right? So let's imagine the city of Austin, Texas, there's a middle cadre, there's 64 people. Now there's a middle cadre in Southeast Austin. Now there's a middle cadre in West Austin. Now there's a middle cadre in the city that's just north of Austin. And that forms a meta cadre. I don't know if that makes sense. I need to have some visualizations. The structure isn't important at the moment. What's really important is that there's people out there that think like you, that are ready and willing to change the world, and that you can find them on the Freedom Cells website. Okay, I am going to recap, and then we are going to let you go. Again, this is the Live Free Now show. You can find us at livefreenow.show, where almost every day I'm bringing you the news, views, tips, and tools you can use to live a free, prosperous, and healthy life. I strongly encourage you to go subscribe to our podcast at livefreenow.show. Follow us here on The Conscious Resistance. You can subscribe to my personal YouTube channel as well. Be sure you check out The Conscious Resistance on all the alternative social media sites, because this YouTube channel could be taken away someday. Put out a lot of great content, over 60,000 subscribers, but it's some pretty radical content. There's been some videos that have been pulled down later. So today we talked about how terrible government is and how so many Americans are caught in the trance of status thinking, falsely believing that the only way we can organize society without there being chaos, the only way we can have a civil society is through the institution of government. And it's necessary every 4 years to elect a new ruler. We talked about how that's a terrible, terrible concept. And one of the reasons why we have so much division in this country is because when one political party or one ruler takes control of government, their policies and views are forced upon everyone else, whether they like it or not. And it doesn't have to be that way. Today, I wanted to present to you some alternatives so you can gain an understanding that there are other ways to do things, and there are innovative ways to do things, and many of them are already being carried out right now. We talked about the Freedom Cell Network, which is my jam. This is a social organization that we're building now, not tomorrow. We're not waiting for the general public to come along. We're not waiting for the politicians to buy into it. We're not waiting for some law saying, oh, it's okay for you to organize like this. We are going ahead and doing it. And there's over 4,000 people globally, and I strongly encourage you to participate as well. You can go to freedomcells.org to sign up. We then talked about the Institute for Competitive Governance, which is all about proliferating these ideas and spreading them. They even have their own little blockchain-based governmental law way where you can set up, it's an open source legal system. Super cool stuff. We talked about the Startup Societies Foundation, which is doing work in this area and encouraging people and teaching people about it and bringing networking, bringing people together, bringing financiers, bringing big money to some of these radical ideas. We talked about special economic zones like Hong Kong and Shenzhen, the idea that governments cede a little bit of power and there's certain regions that can create their own rules, oftentimes with more economic freedom. We talked about the Seasteading Institute, a really cool, radical way where people are building structures, floating cities outside of territorial governance, outside of their jurisdiction, so we can have some experimentation with other ways to live life. And that's already happening. There's already companies that are doing this. There's already some that have been launched. Then Free Private Cities, which is like a business that runs the city, and you have a voluntary contract with the business. And if you don't like it, you can opt out and get the heck out of there. Ideally, there's multiple free private cities competing for your loyalty or for your service or for you to go live there, your residency. And if one of them doesn't work, they're in competition with one another, always constantly improving themselves in order to meet the needs of their clients. And then we talked about the Liberland, which is a radical idea. This guy, Vit, I don't know what his name is. He's the president. They're like, hey, there's this unclaimed disputed territory between Croatia and Serbia. We're just going to go and claim it as our own little country. And that's what they've done. They have like passports and stuff. Super cool. The point is, government as we know it sucks. And we are in the year 2020. We have internet. We have instant communication at our fingertips. It's time that we changed the way we organize society. Not 5, 10, 20 years from now. We need to lay the groundwork now so these systems can come to fruition in our lifetime. And so our children and our children's children can enjoy a better life that isn't coercive. There's not police brutality. There's not one small group of people dictating the course of history, and everyone else is just along for the ride. All right, this is John Bush. I want to thank everyone that's tuned in on the live broadcast. You can find me again at livefreenow.show, where I strongly encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. Peace and freedom. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, think outside of the status box. If you're skeptical about that, I encourage you to look into all these alternatives and look into the true nature of government, coercive top-down hierarchy. If you're already bought into these ideas, which chances are most of you are, I would invite you to redouble your efforts and start sharing these ideas with people. People don't know that it's possible. People aren't aware that there's alternatives. Let's show them the alternatives. More importantly, let's help build the alternatives. All right, peace and freedom.